virus went to the border, and there is some work to be done.
Let me ask both of you, nothing seems to move this race. We're still looking at roughly 50-50. So, might the goal for both tonight to be do no harm?
I think the first rule of a vice presidential pick is to do no harm. And that's not just the pick itself, but in a debate, for example. As we were talking about, though, I think a lot of these camps are already entrenched. A lot of folks are going to vote for Trump no matter what. A lot of folks are going to vote for Kamala no matter what. I think there could be an outside force that really tips the scales here. We just had a hurricane. People are suffering in a state like North Carolina and Georgia, both swing states. A lot of people are suffering, don't get me wrong, but those states matter in this upcoming election. There's now a war, full scale, between Israel and Iran. That's an issue I think the American people care about. And a strike that's going to impact a lot of American people,
they don't move the voters on their own. It's how does the ticket deal with those issues. So I think if you're Walls tonight, you have all these backdrop of these challenging issues you just mentioned. It's reminding people about leadership and why stability and sanity in the situation remaining is actually not.
And that does.
Trump's national security team, many of them don't even want him to get a pen.
Right. And
so that's a challenge for everyone.
Of course it is, but as president, we didn't have wars breaking out all over the world. We didn't have illegal immigrants coming into our American communities, raping and killing people. And those types of things absolutely should be a reminder of the American people that leadership does matter. And we didn't have these problems when Donald Trump was in the White House.
You can take this debate to NBC News now. Continuers at the green room, real quick. Show of hands. Who thinks there'll be another debate between Trump and Harris? Wow.
No.
Who thinks there should be? We'll leave it on this point of agreement. Hogan, Jen, thank you very much. We're going to take a break right here and still ahead tonight. How the vice presidential debate could shake up the polls with Election Day just 35 days away. Our man Steve Kornacki over at the big board to break it all down. Coming up next.
In the north, nature can be harsh, beautiful, and inspiring. Here, we have created one of the most energy-efficient data centers in the world. Nature allows us to cool our servers with mere outdoor air. This complements our mindset of improving every piece of hardware to achieve maximum performance and efficiency. It is here that we have created iSet, the 16th most powerful supercomputer in the world. We like to set ambitious goals and look for new solutions. For example, how to make a supercluster with 8,000 GPUs to warm the neighboring town. Or create the most advanced AI cloud in Europe. Nebius, the ultimate cloud for AI explorers.
Action. Competition. Rivalry. The best sport on TV is election news. Get national election news coverage with the best price on Sling. Kristen Welker hosts Meet the Press every Sunday on NBC.
News for the generation of now is NBC News Now.
Welcome back to our special coverage of the first and only vice presidential debate before Election Day.
Tonight's debate is potentially the last debate voters will see before the general election. It could change voters' minds in the key battleground states.
So we've got Steve Kornacki over at his post to break down where the race stands right now. Hi, Steve.
Hi, Savannah. And let's take a look here. The national poll average first. All the major national polls, we keep a running average. And right now, Kamala Harris at 49%, Trump at 46%, a 3-point lead in the poll average nationally for Kamala Harris right now. Raises the question, this is the third straight election that Donald Trump has been the Republican nominee. How did the race look at this exact same point the last two times? We'll take a look here. 4 years ago, on this date, in the poll average, Joe Biden had a large lead, 9 points over Donald Trump. And of course, Biden did go on to unseat Donald Trump. But 8 years ago, at this same point, Hillary Clinton had a lead. Does that 3 look familiar? The exact same 3-point lead that Kamala Harris has in the poll average now. And of course, Hillary Clinton did win the popular vote in 2016, but she lost to Trump where it matters in the Electoral College, in those key swing states. So what do the swing states look like right now? We've been talking about this core group of 7 battlegrounds. And again, what you're seeing here is our current average of all the polls in those states. And the headline here, obviously, is extremely close. Look, the widest margin you're going to see here is 3 points for Harris in Michigan and in Nevada. Look at North Carolina. You see Harris there leading. I say leading. It's 1/10 of 1 point in the average right now. One thing to keep in mind, we saw big polling misses in the Midwest states in 2016 and 2020. Both elections, they underestimated. The polls did Trump's actual support. Keep that in mind. Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, as we see numbers there this fall. Has that problem been solved? Does it persist? And just for the sake of showing you the state of play right now, this is not a prediction, but if it were to break exactly like this on Election Day, these states were to go exactly as they look right now, let me show you what it would do to the electoral map. So you see we have the battlegrounds in gray. If we fill them in based on the current polling average, this is what you would get. That would give Harris 292. That would be enough for the presidency. But remember, we just showed you, North Carolina, 1/10 of 1 point. Just by getting that, if Trump could get that, he'd be at 262. He'd be 1 Midwest state away from the presidency. So that's how close it is when you start to look at those battleground averages right now. Now, in terms of tonight, possible implications for the vote in November in this vice presidential debate, let's take a look at the image of each one of these candidates coming to the stage tonight. Favorable, unfavorable. This is our most recent poll. Tim Walz, 40% positive, 33 negative. He is 7 points above water. J.D. Vance, on the other hand, 32 favorable, 45 unfavorable, 13 points underwater. In perspective on that, if you went back 10 presidential elections, takes us all the way back to 1988, only one major party vice presidential nominee has been further underwater than J.D. Vance is right now. That was Dan Quayle in 1992 when he was running for re-election with Bush Sr. And of course, that ticket did go on to lose.
All right, Steve, thank you so much.
Kate Snow is talking to a group of voters in the city of Pittsburgh in the critical Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Kate?
Yeah, it is critical, isn't it? Thank you, Lester. I've got 6 voters here with me. All of you described yourselves as somewhat moderate, somewhat in the center, some more than others. I want to start with Rona and Merrill. We've had a lot of news today about Israel and about the attack by Iran. Both of you said you are motivated. You're Jewish, you're Democrats, both of you registered Democrats, but you're seeing this very differently. Rona, tell me why you're thinking about possibly voting for Donald Trump.
Well, today is not a good day to ask me that, I guess, because today, I'm really thankful, right? Largest barrage of ballistic missiles ever shot at a country in history, and the U.S. supported Israel and shot down missiles along with Jordan and Israel, and so I'm so incredibly thankful for that, and a big Biden fan today.
Are you still thinking you might vote Republican?
I am still undecided, yes, absolutely, because I think every day right now is so utterly critical, and watching how this continues to unfold.
And what about you, Merrill?
And for me, today just verified what I've already felt, that the Biden-Harris administration has been very pro-Israel. Today was really an existential threat for the state of Israel once again. And the United States and the Biden administration, along with Vice President Harris, really stepped up.
So you're definitely voting Harris going into tonight's debate.
Yes.
Let me turn to Claire and Brian. Both of you voted for Trump in 2016, then went away from Trump in 2020, and now you're both considering former President Trump again, even though I think you said you don't really like J.D. Vance very much.
I really don't like either of them very much. You know, I'm looking at something different. I want something different. I'm not really sure where we're going to end up.
So maybe tonight you hear something that pushes you?
Maybe if tonight I hear something, you know, it might make up my mind. You know, I'm still kind of up in the air, but...
Claire, you said to me that you're a little worried if you vote for Trump, you wouldn't be able to, you have to lie to your friends.
I mean, I think it's hard to vote for anyone. You know, like keyboard killers, no matter which way. I mean, you vote, you know, in this town democratically, and someone's like, well, you voted for this mayor, and then you see somebody federally, and they say, well, you voted for that president, no matter which side you're on.
Brendan, you said that your community, which I think is a predominantly Black community, is more divided right now, more at odds than you've seen it in an election.
So, it just seems like there is no real middle ground. Everything is radicalized. Everything is extreme, kind of like what she was saying. But more so for my community, being young and African American, it seems like a lot of people are coming to the topic of politics late, and they're missing nuance. So what they're hearing right now is stirring a lot of passion that's bringing them one way or another.
And John, real quick, one word. What do you need to hear tonight?
I guess it's just seeing that Waltz is going to support Kamala Harris. I'm pretty much decided that J.D. Vance and Trump are a danger to our democracy.
Thank you all so much. I'll send it back to you guys, Lester.
All right, Kate, thanks very much. We'll take a break next. We're just minutes away from tonight's vice presidential debate. We'll show it to you live after this.
It's in the feeling, the sound, just like writing on paper, but something entirely new.
I want something that can hold me in the moment, so I am focused. Nothing steals my attention. I know exactly where everything is, so my work can move forward, no matter where I am.
News for the generation of now is NBC News Now.
back to our special coverage of tonight's vice presidential debate.
We're about 7 minutes away now. Ohio Senator J.D. Vance facing off against Minnesota Governor Tim Walz might be the last debate voters see at all before Election Day.
Let's go back to Tom Yamas in the spin room. It's going to be crowded there tonight, if not already.
Oh yeah, you guys, you know that is true. You know, these spin rooms are where the candidates come with their surrogates right after the debate to argue they won the debate. I want to show you a live camera right now with this spin room because it's unlike any we've seen before because of its size. It's only about 3,000 to 4,000 square feet. It's going to be filled with reporters and surrogates. There's going to be a crush of people here after the debate, including at least one of the candidates who's debating tonight. So this could be chaotic, it could be exciting, it could be fun, it could be wild. We'll have no idea until after the debate. I will tell you this much, it reminds me of my younger days when you go to house parties here in Manhattan, inside studio apartments, and there was way more people than there was room. Nonetheless, it'll be memorable, and we're going to look for all that excitement right after the debate.
Well, we learned a lot about you, Tom. I don't know if he was describing a spin room or a ring.
There was more of that story.
All right, let's get this. White House correspondent Kelly O'Donnell. We're going to get to the bottom of that one. Also in the spoon room, you're talking to Tim Walz's staff. So, Kelly, what's the vibe?
Well, I've just heard from those with Governor Walz. They say Vice President Harris put in a phone call to him to wish him good luck. You'd heard about some nerves before all of this. Now they're saying he's energized and he's ready. Among the top goals for Governor Walz today is to be able to talk about Kamala Harris and what she could bring to the country and to try to tie J.D. Vance to the Project 2025 agenda that former President Trump tries to distance himself from as much as possible. They also, in their prep, expect that Vance will try to get under the skin of Governor Walz, and he's going to try to focus on reaching voters who have not yet made up their minds, and they also expect that Governor Walz will have to answer for some of the things that have been a frequent target of J.D. Vance, like questions about his military record, and a time when Governor Walz said that he had been in combat when he was in a foreign country working on behalf of the Afghanistan operation, but not in Afghanistan. So they expect that he'll have to answer for that, and what they have prepared is in some ways to talk about his 24 years in the National Guard and saying that is longer than anything that J.D. Vance has done in his professional life, and that they think that is not an argument that Vance can win. So, tone-wise, you're going to see Governor Walz trying to be that affable coach, teacher, dad, and to try to relate to those in the middle of the country who also enjoy plaid, as I know you have noted, Savannah.
All right, Kelly, thank you.
Let's bring back Garrett Hake in the spin room. He's covering the Trump-Vance campaign. What are your thoughts here as we head down to the final minutes?
At the end of the day, Lester, this is still all about the people at the top of the ticket. That's something that wasn't lost today in Trump world. Donald Trump did something unusual today. He held not one, but two campaign events of his own on the day of his VP debate, both of them in Wisconsin, mentioning J.D. Vance just one time during those two events in response to a question. So for Donald Trump, this is still about Trump versus Harris, and I think that'll be something that's forefront on the mind of J.D. Vance when he takes the stage tonight as well. Lester.
Thank you, Garrett. Let's bring back Kristen Welker, Hallie Jackson, and Peter Alexander is joining the conversation. And Peter, I mean, based on everything we've talked about in the last hour, it seems like, in a way, Tim Walz, the work for him is on substance. What does he stand for? Defending past positions as governor of Minnesota. And for J.D. Vance, it's about style. It's about likability, about some of the controversial things he said. That seems like where the work is.
Yeah, I think you guys are right. We've made a lot of these points to this point. One other point that I would just add to this conversation is, remember how this whole campaign started where age was the big issue? Joe Biden was going to be 86 at the end of the second term. Right now, Donald Trump is 78 years old. His age means there's a little bit unique attention being focused on J.D. Vance right now. He's 40. You're going to see Tim Walz, who is 60 years old today. The last time there was a big age discrepancy like this, 1988, Lloyd Benson and Dan Quayle, who was 41, a year older, of course, than J.D. Vance is when he's up there on stage.
And Vance has been senator for 2 years.
And the gist is, that was one of the rare moments where a line broke through. You know, I knew John F. Kennedy, you know John F. Kennedy. These moments rarely break through. Is there a viral moment like that that sort of defines this night, or is it a wash ultimately with the last birthday?
Kristen, at the end of the day, I asked this question with 3 minutes to go. Do these debates matter? Does a vice presidential debate matter to the big picture?
They can matter. Think about back in 2012 when Joe Biden had a very strong debate performance against Paul Ryan and really helped to reset the campaign after former President Obama stumbled in his first debate against Mitt Romney. So yes, they can matter. Again, I think this takes on outsized meaning because of the fact that there's no second presidential debate. One more point, in listening to those voters that Kate was talking to, all of them seem so frustrated in the process. And you think about that word change. Right now, Vice President Kamala Harris wins on the change argument by 9 points. I think that's part of the work that J.D. Vance is going to try to do.
Well, change is interesting because she's an incumbent, but so is former President Trump.
Right.
So it's interesting to see that. And people say, or they like to say, conventional wisdom, these vice presidential debates don't matter. And maybe they didn't when elections weren't decided by 10,000 voters.
That's exactly right. In 2 different states, and that's it. I come back to something that you have said from the jump, Savannah, through this election cycle, which is let's have a little bit of humility here, right? It's hard for us to predict, especially with the race this close, especially with the dynamic of no next debate for the presidential candidates. Remember what this race is going to come down to. Those 6 critical battlegrounds, the economy and immigration. We have seen that consistently in the polling. Expect to hear both of those issues hammered big time on stage tonight.
And worth noting also, this is the first presidential election since Roe was overturned. I think that's going to be an X factor too.
Mics will be on tonight. Is that going to make a huge difference in terms of expectations based on what we saw in the presidential debate?
Remember, it was the Harris campaign that in the presidential debate wanted the mics to be on throughout here. This time they are on throughout. CBS can turn them off as necessary, but it's that back and forth. They're hoping you can hear those snide comments perhaps by either side.
Show of hands, who thinks there will be another debate between Trump and Harris?
Listen to me with this show.
Show of hands. It's a quick poll. Okay. Who thinks it should be?
We're journalists. We can
There we go.
Good answer. Well, it is the top of the hour now, 9 p.m. here in New York City. We're just seconds away from tonight's only vice presidential debate between Ohio Republican Senator J.D. Vance and Minnesota Democratic Governor Tim Walz.
That's right. It is also potentially, if you haven't noticed, possibly the last debate we will see before Election Day. Election Day now just 35 days away, 5 weeks.
We've kind of set the table here on what people will be looking at and what we'll all be talking about in a little while. We will have in-depth analysis once the debate concludes here on NBC. But tonight's event is hosted by CBS News in their studio in New York, just a few blocks from here.
Yeah, and as the last debate was between the running mates, Donald Trump and Kamala Harris, there's no audience in there tonight. So each candidate is going to have 2 minutes for their answers, and then there's a rebuttal. And the moderators have said, Lester, there will be some fact-checking, but they're really counting on the candidates to fact-check each other.
And as we noted, unlike the last debate, microphones will not be muted, but the network says they reserve the right to mute the candidates, so that'll be an interesting process as they go along.
Okay, the vice presidential debate about to be on. Let's go to CBS Network Studios, West 57th, here in the heart of Manhattan, and watch this debate.
Presidential debate.
Good evening, I'm Nora O'Donnell, and thank you for joining us for tonight's CBS News Vice Presidential Debate. We want to welcome our viewers on CBS, on other networks here in the U.S. and around the world. We have a consequential night ahead, and our focus is the issues that matter to you, the voter. Let's introduce the candidates. Minnesota's Democratic Governor Tim Walz and Ohio's Republican Senator J.D. Vance tonight meeting for the first time. I'm Margaret Brennan. In order to have a thoughtful and civil debate, these are the rules that both campaigns have agreed to. Questions will be directed at one candidate who will have 2 minutes to respond. The other candidate will be allowed 2 minutes for rebuttal. Then each candidate will get another minute to make further points, with an additional 1 minute each at the discretion of the moderator. The primary role of the moderators is to facilitate the debate between the candidates, enforce the rules, and provide the candidates with the opportunity to fact-check claims.
Alo bà con cô chú bác,
CBS News
trận đấu
reserves the right to mute the
giữa hai ứng cử viên tổng thống đảng Dân Chủ và đảng Cộng Hòa bắt đầu nha quý vị. Và đây là trận đấu duy nhất của cuộc bầu cử tổng thống năm nay. Mời quý vị theo dõi trận đấu nha. Nhớ bình luận nha quý vị, chia sẻ, bấm like, thả tim, rầm rộ dùm Tony Lê nha quý vị.
We're going to begin tonight with the Middle East. Margaret. Thank you, Nora. Earlier today, Iran launched its largest attack yet on Israel, but that attack failed thanks to joint U.S. and Israeli defensive action. President Biden has deployed more than 40,000 U.S. military personnel and assets to that region over the past year to try to prevent a regional war. Iran is weakened,
But the U.S. still considers it the largest state sponsor of terrorism in the world, and it has drastically reduced the time it would take to develop a nuclear weapon. It is down now to 1 or 2 weeks' time. Governor Walz, if you were the final voice in the Situation Room, would you support or oppose a preemptive strike by Israel on Iran? You have 2 minutes.
Well, thank you, and thank you for those joining home tonight. Let's keep in mind where this started. October 7th, Hamas terrorists massacred over 1,400 Israelis and took prisoners.
Câu hỏi đầu tiên dành cho hai ứng cử viên phó tổng thống là về cái chuyện Trung Đông. Ngày hôm nay Iran đã bắn qua ít nhất gần 500 tên lửa vào đồng minh của Mỹ là Israel. Nhưng mà cũng may mắn Mỹ và các đồng minh đã bắn hạ được những cái tên lửa đó. Bây giờ để coi hai ứng cử viên phó tổng thống sẽ trả lời như thế nào nha quý vị về cái tình hình ở Trung Đông đang dậy sóng.
But what's fundamental here is that steady leadership is going to matter. It's clear, and the world saw it on that debate stage a few weeks ago. A nearly 80-year-old Donald Trump talking about crowd sizes is not what we need in this moment. But it's not just that. It's those that were closest to Donald Trump that understand how dangerous he is when the world is this dangerous. His chief of staff, John Kelly, said that he was the most flawed human being he'd ever met. And both of his secretaries of defense and his national security advisors said he should be nowhere near the White House. Now, the person closest to them, Donald Trump, said he's unfit for the highest office. That was Senator Vance. What we've seen out of Vice President Harris is we've seen steady leadership. We've seen a calmness that is able to draw on the coalitions to bring them together. Understanding that our allies matter. When our allies see Donald Trump turn towards Vladimir Putin, turn towards North Korea, when we start to see that type of fickleness around holding the coalitions together, we will stay committed. And as the Vice President said today we will protect our forces and our allied forces, and there will be consequences.
Governor, your time is up. Senator Vance, the same question. Would you support or oppose a preemptive strike by Israel on Iran? You have 2 minutes.
So, Maria, I want to answer the question. First of all, thanks, Governor. Thanks to CBS for hosting the debate. And thanks, most importantly, to the American people who are watching this evening and caring enough about this country to pay attention to this vice presidential debate. I want to answer the question, but I want to actually give an introduction to myself a little bit because I recognize a lot of Americans don't know who either one of us are. I was raised in a working-class family. My mother required food assistance for periods of her life. My grandmother required Social Security help to raise me, and she raised me in part because my mother struggled with addiction for a big chunk of my early life. I went to college on the GI Bill after I enlisted in the Marine Corps and served in Iraq. And so I stand here asking to be your vice president with extraordinary gratitude for this country, for the American dream that made it possible for me to live my dreams. And most importantly, I know that a lot of you are worried about the chaos in the world and the feeling that the American dream is unattainable. I want to try to convince you tonight over the next 90 minutes that if we get better leadership in the White House, if we get Donald Trump back in the White House, the American dream is going to be attainable once again. Now, to answer this particular question, we have to remember that as much as Governor Walz just accused Donald Trump of being an agent of chaos, Donald Trump actually delivered stability in the world, and he did it by establishing effective deterrence. People were afraid of stepping out of line. Iran, which launched this attack, has received over $100 billion in unfrozen assets thanks to the Kamala Harris administration. What do they use that money for? They use it to buy weapons that they're now launching against our allies, and God forbid, potentially launching against the United States as well. Donald Trump recognized that for people to fear the United States, you needed peace through strength. They needed to recognize that if it got out of line, the United States global leadership would put stability and peace back in the world. Now, you asked about a preemptive strike, Margaret, and I want to answer the question. Look, it is up to Israel what they think they need to do to keep their country safe, and we should support our allies wherever they are when they're fighting the bad guys. I think that's the right approach to take with the Israel question.
Thank you, Senator. Governor Walz, do you care to respond to any of the allegations?
Well, look, Donald Trump was in office. We'll sometimes hear a revisionist history, but when Donald Trump was in office, it was Donald Trump
Ứng cử viên bên phía đảng Dân Chủ cứ đem Tổng thống Trump ra đổ thừa. Người ta hỏi là sẽ giải quyết cái vấn đề hôm nay ở Trung Đông là Iran nó phóng tên lửa qua đồng minh của Mỹ, giải quyết như thế nào, vân vân và vân vân. Cái ông ứng cử viên của đảng Dân Chủ cứ đem Tổng thống Trump ra đổ thừa tới, đổ thừa lui, đổ thừa xuôi, đổ thừa ngược, chẳng có trả lời câu hỏi gì cả. Còn phía bên đảng Cộng Hòa thì người ta trả lời rất là hay. Ok.
Donald Trump wrote it off as headaches. Look, our allies understand that Donald Trump is fickle. He will go to whoever has the most flattery or where it makes sense to him. Steady leadership like you witnessed today, like you witnessed in April. Both Iranian attacks were repelled. Our coalition is strong, and we need the steady leadership that Kamala Harris is providing.
Senator Vance, the U.S. did have a diplomatic deal with Iran to temporarily pause parts of its nuclear program, and President Trump did exit that deal. He recently said, just 5 days ago, the U.S. must now make a diplomatic deal with Iran because the consequences are impossible. Did he make a mistake? You have 1 minute.
Well, first of all, Margaret, diplomacy is not a dirty word, but I think that's something that Governor Walz just said is quite extraordinary. You yourself just said Iran is as close to a nuclear weapon today as they have ever been. And Governor Walz, you blame Donald Trump, who has been the vice president for the last 3.5 years, and the answer is your running mate, not mine. Donald Trump consistently made the world more secure. Now, we talk about the sequence of events that led us to where we are right now, and you can't ignore October the 7th, which I appreciate Governor Walz bringing up. But when did Iran and Hamas and their proxies attack Israel? It was during the administration of Kamala Harris. So Governor Walz can criticize Donald Trump's tweets, but effective, smart diplomacy and peace through strength is how you bring stability back to a very broken world. Donald Trump has already done it once before. Ask yourself at home, when was the last time, I'm 40 years old, when was the last time that an American president didn't have a major conflict break out? The only answer is during the 4 years that Donald Trump was president.
Gentlemen, we have a lot to get to. Nora?
Quý vị nghe ứng cử viên của đảng Cộng Hòa trả lời chưa? Trong thời gian qua, trong tất cả các đời tổng thống, đảng Dân Chủ, đảng Cộng Hòa chỉ có đời của Tổng thống Trump là không có chiến tranh trên cái quả địa cầu này thôi đó quý vị nhé.
And more deadly because of the historic rainfall. Senator Vance, according to CBS News polling, 7 in 10 Americans and more than 60% of Republicans under the age of 45 favor the U.S. taking steps to try and reduce climate change. Senator, what responsibility would the Trump administration have to try and reduce the impact of climate change? I'll give you 2 minutes.
Sure. So first of all, let's start with the hurricane because it's an unbelievable, unspeakable human tragedy. I just saw today actually a photograph of 2 grandparents on a roof with a 6-year-old child, and it was the last photograph ever taken of them because the roof collapsed and those innocent people lost their lives. And I'm sure Governor Walz joins me in saying our hearts go out to those innocent people, our prayers go out to them, and we want as robust and aggressive as a federal response as we can get to save as many lives as possible, and then of course afterwards to help the people in those communities rebuild. I mean, these are communities that I love. Some of them I know very personally in Appalachia, all across the Southeast. They need their government to
Theo
do
như
their
quý
job.
vị nhìn hai ứng cử viên phó tổng thống, quý vị thấy người nào thông minh lanh lẹ, quý vị thấy người nào trả lời trôi chảy suôn sẻ. Chắc là quý vị biết rồi chứ gì đúng không? Không cần Tony Lê nói nhiều đúng không? Quý vị thấy ứng cử viên đảng Cộng Hòa chưa? Sáng sủa, thông minh, trả lời lanh lẹ, suôn sẻ, đúng không?
Is a concern about carbon emissions, this idea that carbon emissions drives all of the climate change. Well, let's just say that's true, just for the sake of argument, so we're not arguing about weird science. Let's just say that's true. Well, if you believe that, what would you want to do? The answer is that you'd want to reshore as much American manufacturing as possible, and you'd want to produce as much energy as possible in the United States of America because we're the cleanest economy in the entire world. What have Kamala Harris's policies
ứng
actually
cử
led
viên
to?
phó tổng thống của đảng Cộng Hòa nói là nếu tổng thống Trump làm tổng thống sẽ sản xuất dầu hỏa, năng lượng trong đất nước Mỹ, sẽ tạo rất là nhiều công ăn việc làm cho người dân Mỹ và năng lượng sẽ rẻ trong cái đất nước Mỹ này. Đó là điều đầu tiên đó quý vị.
workers and the American people. And unfortunately, Kamala Harris has done exactly the opposite.
Governor Walz, you have 2 minutes to respond.
Well, we got close to an agreement because all those things are happening. Look, first of all, it is a horrific tragedy with this hurricane, and my heart goes out to the folks that are down there in contact with the governors. I serve as co-chair of the Council of Governors as we work together on these emergency managements. Governors know no partisanship. They work together to all the governors and the emergency responders on the ground. Those happen on the front end. The federal government comes in, makes sure they're there so that we recover, but we're still in that phase where we need to make sure that they're staying there, staying focused. Now look, coming back to the climate change issue, there's no doubt this thing roared onto the scene faster and stronger than anything we've seen. Senator Vance has said that there's a climate problem in the past. Donald Trump called it a hoax, and then joked that these things would make more beachfront property to be able to invest in. What we've seen out of the Harris administration now, the Biden-Harris administration, is we've seen this investment. We've seen massive investments, the biggest in global history that we've seen in the Inflation Reduction Act, has created jobs all across the country. 2,000 in Jeffersonville, Ohio, taking the EV technology that we invented and making it here. 200,000
Trong mấy ngày vừa qua, trên cái đất nước Mỹ này ít nhất 6 cái tiểu bang, hàng trăm người bị chết, hàng triệu ngôi nhà bị nước cuốn trôi lũ lụt. 4-5 triệu người đang sống trong cảnh tăm tối. Ok, chỉ có một mình Tổng thống Trump là xung pha vào những cái nơi lũ lụt bão bùng để mà cứu trợ người dân Mỹ. Còn Tổng thống Mỹ và Phó Tổng thống thì không thấy mặt đâu hết. Bà Harris thì đi qua bên California để vận động tranh cử để tranh cái chức vụ tổng thống. Còn ông tổng thống kia thì đi vacation, đi nghỉ hè. Không ai đi thăm người dân, không ai đi cứu trợ người dân. Quý vị thấy nó tào lao quá, đúng không? Hồi chiều này Tony Lê có làm một cái video chia sẻ những cái hình ảnh mà Tổng thống Trump đã xông pha vào lũ lụt, xông pha vào bão bùng để mà đi cứu trợ người dân Mỹ đó quý vị. Trong khi tổng thống thì đi, tổng thống đương nhiệm thì đi nghỉ hè, đi hưởng thụ.
Give you an opportunity to respond there. The governor mentioned that President Trump has called climate change a hoax. Do you agree?
Bà con cô chú bác nhớ bấm like nha. Nghe tranh luận nghe gây cấn quá đúng không? Quên bấm like luôn đúng không? Hôm nay không có thấy mặt Tony Lê tại vì buổi tối Tony Lê xấu hơn ban ngày, cho nên ngày mai sáng quý vị sẽ thấy mặt Tony Lê nhé.
So clearly Kamala Harris herself doesn't believe her own rhetoric on this. If she did, she would actually agree with Donald Trump's energy policies. Now, something Governor Walz said I think is important to touch upon, because when we talk about clean energy, I think that's a slogan that often the Democrats will use here. I'm talking, of course, about the Democratic leadership.
Đặc biệt là những bà con cô chú bác nào ở trên cái đất nước Mỹ này đó mà chưa có đổ xăng, chưa có đi mua đồ dự trữ trong nhà thì nên chuẩn bị đi nhé. Tại vì ngày mai á, xăng nó đã bắt đầu lên giá hồi chiều này rồi, tại vì Iran nó quánh lộn với Israel á, ở vùng Trung Đông á, thành ra bây giờ xăng bắt đầu lên giá rồi. Từ hồi chiều tới bây giờ á, xem là với Costco á, coi như là người dân Mỹ người ta chen cứng ở trong đó để mà mua đồ dự trữ nè, ví dụ như là giấy đi cầu nè, nước uống nè, đổ xăng đầy bình xăng nè. Tại vì ngày mai vật giá nó sẽ leo thang, xăng cộ nó sẽ mắc mỏ đó quý vị nhé. Cộng với hàng loạt các cảng ở trên cái đất nước Mỹ này đình công. Thành ra bây giờ á, nó nôm na là hàng hóa nó sẽ bị thiếu hụt, khan hiếm, tại vì các cảng của đất nước Mỹ này đang bị đình công đó bà con ơi, nhớ nha.
These are not liberal folks. These are not folks that are Green New Deal folks. These are farmers that have been drought one year, massive flooding the next year. They understand that it makes sense. Look, our number one export cannot be topsoil from erosion from these massive storms. We saw it in Minnesota this summer. And thinking about how do we respond to that, we're thinking ahead on this. And what Kamala Harris has been able to do in Minnesota, we're starting to weatherproof some of these things. The infrastructure law that was passed allows us to think about mitigation in the future. How do we make sure that we're protecting by burying our power lines? How do we make sure that we're protecting lakefronts and things that we're seeing more and more of? But to call it a hoax and to take the oil company executives to Mar-a-Lago, say, give me money for my campaign and I'll let you do whatever you want. We can be smarter about that, and an all-above energy policy is exactly what she's doing, creating those jobs right here.
Governor, your time is up. The overwhelming consensus among scientists is that the Earth's climate is warming at an unprecedented rate. Margaret?
Thank you, Nora. We're going to turn now to immigration. The crisis at the U.S.-Mexico
Ok, bây giờ cái chủ đề bắt đầu là chuyển sang cái chuyện di dân lậu nào quý vị. Cái chuyện di dân này quý vị nhé, nghe kỹ nè.
Your campaign is pledging to carry out the largest mass deportation plan.
Nãy giờ chúng ta nói hai cái chủ đề. Chủ đề thứ nhất là cái vùng chiến tranh Trung Đông, cái chủ đề thứ hai là về cái khí hậu, biến đổi khí hậu, năng lượng đó quý vị. Bây giờ chủ đề thứ ba là di dân nè quý vị nhé.
And separate them from any of their children who were born on U.S. soil. You have 2 minutes.
So first of all, Margaret, before we talk about deportations, we have to stop the bleeding. We have a historic immigration crisis because Kamala Harris started and said that she wanted to undo all of Donald Trump's border policies. 94 executive orders suspending deportations, decriminalizing illegal aliens, massively increasing the asylum fraud that exists in our system. That has opened the floodgates. And what it's meant is that a lot of fentanyl is coming into our country.
Câu hỏi cho ứng cử viên Đảng Cộng Hòa là làm cách nào để giải quyết cái chuyện di dân. Ok, thì ứng cử viên Phó Tổng thống Đảng Cộng Hòa nói là khi mà chúng ta muốn trị làm vết thương thì chúng ta phải làm sao cho nó đừng có chảy máu nữa. Thứ nhất là chúng ta phải làm cho cái biên giới nó an toàn để di dân lậu nó đừng có đột nhập vào đất nước Mỹ nữa. Ok, rồi sau đó chúng ta sẽ trục xuất những người di dân lậu ra khỏi đất nước Mỹ. Đó là những gì mà ông ứng cử viên của Đảng Cộng Hòa đang trả lời đó quý vị nhé. Tại vì tất cả gần 9 triệu di dân lậu mà ùa vào đất nước Mỹ này trong thời gian 3 năm rưỡi qua là từ Đảng Dân Chủ, từ những cái chính sách của ông Tổng thống Mỹ Joe Biden và bà Harris đã không làm cho cái biên giới nó an toàn, làm cho cái biên giới nó bất an, giống như một cái chợ cá, ai đi ra đi vào cũng được. Và đó là lý do tại sao mà cái di dân lậu nó nó ùa vào đất nước Mỹ trong thời gian vừa qua gần 9 triệu người. Bây giờ thì muốn trục xuất cũng là cả một vấn đề đó quý vị. Tại tốn rất là nhiều tiền bạc, thời gian để trục xuất những người di dân lậu này chứ không phải chuyện giỡn chơi đâu quý vị nhé. Tony Lê chỉ thông dịch lại những cái ý chính thôi nha bà con nhé, chứ Tony Lê không có thông dịch từng chữ, từng lời nói của những ứng cử viên này đâu quý vị ơi, tại vì nó sẽ mất rất là nhiều thời gian. Bà con nào rảnh rỗi nhớ bình luận đặng cho Tony Lê biết là quý vị còn đang xem nhé. Nhớ bình luận và bấm like nha bà con ơi.
Do you care to respond to any of those specific allegations?
Rồi để coi ông ứng cử viên Đảng Dân Chủ sẽ trả lời và sẽ đổ thừa ai về cái vụ di dân lậu này đây.
Drug mules, among other things, regarding children.
The drug mule is not true, but I will say about this, about the fentanyl, because this is a crisis of this, the opioid crisis. And the good news on this is the last 12 months saw the largest decrease in opioid deaths in our nation's history. 30% decrease in Ohio, but there's still more work to do. But let's go back to this on immigration. Kamala Harris was the Attorney General of the largest state, a border state in California. She's the only person in this race who prosecuted transnational gangs for human trafficking and drug interventions. But look, we all want to solve it. Most of us want to solve this, and that is the United States Congress. That's the Border Patrol agents. That's the Chamber of Commerce. That's most Americans out here. That's why we had the fairest and the toughest bill on immigration that this nation's seen. It was crafted by a conservative senator from Oklahoma, James Lankford. I know him. He's super conservative, but he's a man of principle, wants to get it done. Democrats and Republicans worked on this piece of legislation. The Border Patrol said, this is what we need in here. These are the experts. And the Chamber of Commerce and the Wall Street Journal said, pass this thing. Kamala Harris helped get there. 1,500 new border agents. Detection for drugs. DOJ money to speed up the adjudications on this, just what America wants. But as soon as I was getting ready to pass and actually tackle this, Donald Trump said no, told them to vote against it because it gives
lại một lần nữa ứng cử viên Phó Tổng thống của Đảng Dân Chủ đổ thừa Tổng thống Trump. Thật sự thì trong 3 năm rưỡi vừa qua quý vị biết ai là người lãnh đạo đất nước Mỹ, chính quyền nào đang ở trong tòa Bạch Ốc, đúng không? Tổng thống Trump không có làm việc trong tòa Bạch Ốc trong 3 năm rưỡi qua, nhưng mà ông này ông đang đổ thừa là những người di dân lậu, cái biên giới, cái chính sách di dân, dân dân là tại lỗi của Tổng thống Trump chứ không phải là do ông Biden và bà Harris. Quý vị thấy ông này ông trả lời như vậy có hợp lý, hợp lệ, có đúng hay không? Nếu Tổng thống Trump là tổng thống trong 3 năm rưỡi vừa qua đó thì ông có thể là trả lời đổ thừa được. Còn cái này ai đã lãnh đạo đất nước Mỹ 3 năm rưỡi vừa qua và đang lãnh đạo, ok?
Question was, will you separate parents from their children, even if their kids are U.S. citizens? You have 1 minute.
Margaret, my point is that we already have massive child separations thanks to Kamala Harris's open border. And I didn't accuse Kamala Harris of inviting drug mules. I said that she enabled the Mexican drug cartels to operate freely in this country, and we know that they use children as drug mules, and it is a disgrace, and it has to stop. Look, I think what Tim said just doesn't pass the smell test. For 3 years, Kamala Harris went out bragging that she was going to...
Quý vị thấy không? Tất cả những cái gì mà phía ứng cử viên đảng Dân Chủ trả lời ba cái chủ đề vừa qua đó toàn là đổ thừa cho Tổng thống Trump. Cái vụ mà ở Trung Đông đang quánh nhau cũng đổ thừa cho Tổng thống Trump. Cái vụ mà về biến đổi khí hậu cũng đổ thừa cho chính quyền Tổng thống Trump. Bây giờ cả luôn cái chuyện di dân lậu vào đất nước Mỹ cũng đổ thừa cho Tổng thống Trump. Mà thật sự thì trong 3 năm rưỡi vừa qua Tổng thống Trump chẳng có làm Tổng thống mà cũng chẳng có làm Phó Tổng thống. Vậy mà đổ thừa được, hay quá.
Senator, your time is up. Governor, what about our CBS News polling, which does show that a majority of Americans, more than 50%, support mass deportations?
Look, we fix this issue.
Đó, quý vị thấy không? Cái người hướng dẫn chương trình mới vừa nói là hơn phân nửa đất nước Mỹ, người dân Mỹ muốn trục xuất những người di dân lậu. Tại vì sao? Thứ nhất là không phải nước Mỹ người ta không có nhân đạo mà người ta rất là nhân đạo, nhưng mà cái gì cũng vậy nó phải đúng luật pháp nha quý vị. Tức là người ta welcome quý vị nhập vào đất nước Mỹ nhưng mà phải đúng luật pháp, phải đàng hoàng, chứ không có cái chuyện là trái pháp luật giống như đảng Dân Chủ. Đảng Dân Chủ thì nó mở cửa tù tội vào, hút sách vào, đỉ điếm vào, băng đảng vào. Cái đó là làm cho những người hợp pháp, những người dân Mỹ có cuộc sống bất an đó quý vị. Okay.
But by standing with Donald Trump and not working together to find a solution, it becomes a talking point. And when it becomes a talking point like this, we dehumanize and villainize other human beings.
Tim, Governor, your time is up. Senator, I'll give you 1 minute, but let me just ask you the question first. The governor has made the point, and I think as a sitting lawmaker, you know that Congress controls the purse strings and any funding. So you have said repeatedly that Donald Trump would, through executive action, solve this. Do you disagree that Congress controls the purse strings and would need to support many of the changes that you would actually want to implement? You have 1 minute.
Margaret, first of all, the gross majority of what we need to do at the southern border is just empowering law enforcement to do their job. I've been to the southern border more than our borders are. Kamala Harris has been, and it's actually heartbreaking because the Border Patrol agents, they just want to be empowered to do their job. Of course, additional resources would help, but most of this is about the president and the vice president empowering our law enforcement to say, if you try to come across the border illegally, you've got to stay in Mexico, you've got to go back through proper channels. Now, Governor Walz brought up the community of Springfield, and he's very worried about the things that I've said in Springfield. Look, in Springfield, Ohio, and in communities all across this country, you've got schools that are overwhelmed, you've got hospitals that are overwhelmed, you've got housing that is totally unaffordable because we brought in millions of illegal immigrants to compete with Americans for scarce homes. The people that I'm most worried about in Springfield, Ohio, are the American citizens who have had their lives destroyed by Kamala Harris's open border. It is a disgrace, Tim, and I actually think, I agree with you, I think you want to solve this problem, but I don't think that Kamala Harris does.
Senator, your time is up. Governor, you have 1 minute to respond.
Yeah, well, it is law enforcement that asked for the bill. They helped craft it. They're the ones that supported it. That's because they know we need to do this. Look, this issue of continuing to bring this up, of not dealing with it, of blaming migrants for everything. On housing, we could talk a little bit about Wall Street speculators buying up housing and making them less affordable, but it becomes a blame. Look, this bill also gives the money necessary to adjudicate. I agree, it should not take 7 years for an asylum claim to be done. This bill gets it done in 90 days. Then you start to make a difference in this, and you start to adhere to what we know, American principles. Look, I don't talk about my faith a lot, but Matthew 25:40 talks about, to the least amongst us you do unto me. I think that's true of most Americans. They simply want order to it. This bill does it. It's funded. It's supported by the people who do it, and it lets us keep our dignity about how we treat other people.
Thank you, Governor. And just to clarify for our viewers, Springfield, Ohio does have a large number of Haitian migrants who have legal status, temporary protected status.
Thank you.
Senator, we have so much to get to.
Margaret, I think it's important because Margaret, the rules were that you guys were going to fact check, and since you're fact checking me, I think it's important to say what's actually going on. So there's an application called the CBP-1 app, where you can go on as an illegal migrant, apply for asylum.
Hai người sứ ngôn viên của cái đài này cũng đang nghiêng về phía đảng Dân Chủ nha quý vị. Quý vị thấy cái cách hỏi là quý vị biết rồi đó. Đa số thì các đài truyền thông chính thống ở trên cái đất nước Mỹ thì nó nghiêng về phía đảng Dân Chủ. Đó, quý vị thấy chưa?
Thank you, gentlemen.
The CBP app has not been on the books since 1990. It's something that Kamala Harris created, Margaret.
Gentlemen, the audience can't hear you because your mics are cut. We have so much we want to get to. Thank you for explaining the legal process. Nora.
Thank you, Margaret. The economy is a top concern for
Bây giờ chúng
voters.
ta sẽ bàn về cái chủ đề kinh tế nè quý vị. Đây là một cái chủ đề mà gây cấn nè quý vị nhé.
Vice President Harris unveiled a plan that includes billions in tax credits for manufacturing, housing, and a renewed child tax credit. The Wharton School says your proposals will increase the nation's deficit by $1.2 trillion. How would you pay for that without ballooning the deficit? Governor, I'll give you 2 minutes.
Yeah, thank you. And Kamala Harris and I do believe in the middle class because that's where we come from. We both grew up in that. We understand. So those of you out there listening tonight, you're hearing a lot of stuff back and forth, and it's good. It's healthy. That's what this is supposed to happen. You should be listening. How's this going to impact me? The bold forward plan that Kamala Harris put out there is talking about this housing issue. The one thing is there's 3 million new houses proposed under this plan with down payment assistance on the front end to get you a house. A house is much more than just an asset to be traded somewhere. It's foundational to where you're at. And then making sure that the things you buy every day, whether they be
phía bên ứng cử viên đảng Dân Chủ thì đang hứa hẹn là sẽ làm cho giá nhà rẻ, rồi sẽ cho người dân tiền để mà down payment vô cái nhà dân dân, nhưng mà thật sự nó hứa thôi quý vị nhé. Quý vị đừng có tin, tại vì nếu mà nó làm á thì 3 năm rưỡi vừa qua nó đã làm rồi quý vị ơi, chứ đâu có để mà nó tệ đến mức độ như thế này. Quý vị thấy không, kinh tế của đất nước Mỹ 3 năm rưỡi vừa qua nó đang dùng dãy chết. Nhà cửa thì nó đắt đỏ, tiền lãi suất thì nó cao, vật giá thì nó leo thang, chiến tranh thì nó rầm rộ. Rồi hôm nay á, hàng loạt các cảng trên cái đất nước Mỹ này nó đình công. Trời ơi, một cái trận đình công mà làm cho cả cái thị trường này máu nhộn bãi Thượng Hải. Thành ra bây giờ mà còn đứng đây mà hứa hẹn là bầu cho tao đi, tao sẽ làm cho giá nhà nó rẻ, tao sẽ cho mày tiền đao nhà dân dân. Quý vị mà nghe nói xong quý vị không còn một cái hạt lúa để mà đi bán nữa, người ta gọi là bán lúa giống đó. Quý vị không còn một hạt gạo để mà bán nữa. Đừng nghe những gì đảng Dân Chủ nó nói mà hãy nhìn những gì tụi nó làm đi quý vị. Trong 3 năm rưỡi vừa qua nó làm cái gì cho quý vị rồi, cho đất nước Mỹ rồi. Đó, nhìn đi. Ông này ông nói là bà Harris hứa hẹn là sẽ cho người dân Mỹ giá nhà rẻ, tiền để đao nhà. Ở đâu ra? Tiền ở đâu ra?
Senator, I want to give you a moment to respond on that. But similarly, the Wharton School has done an analysis of the Trump plan and says it would increase the nation's deficit by $5.8 trillion. My question is the same for you. How do you pay for all that without ballooning the deficit? I'll give you 2 minutes.
Well, first of all, you're going to hear a lot from Tim Walz this evening, and you just heard it in the answer, a lot of what Kamala Harris proposes to do, and some of it, I'll be honest with you, it even sounds pretty good. Here's what you won't hear, is that Kamala Harris has already done it. Because she's been the vice president for 3.5 years, she had the opportunity to enact all of these.
Đó, những gì mà Tony Lê nói là ông này ông đang nói đó. 3 năm rưỡi vừa qua bà Harris đã làm gì cho quý vị? 3 năm rưỡi vừa qua bà Harris đã làm gì cho đất nước Mỹ? 3 năm rưỡi vừa qua bà Harris đã cống hiến cái gì cho đất nước Mỹ, cho người dân Mỹ? Quý vị nhìn lại đi. Đừng nghe những gì bà hứa trong 4 năm tới, mà hãy nhìn những gì bà làm trong 3 năm rưỡi vừa qua và còn nửa năm cuối cùng. Ok. Đó, quý vị. Đừng nghe những gì bà hứa mà hãy nhìn những gì bà đã làm trong 4 năm vừa qua. Ok.
Now, Donald Trump's economic plan is not just a plan, but it's also a record. A lot of those same economists attack Donald Trump's plans, and
đó, quý vị nghe đây. Quý vị hãy nhìn những gì Tổng thống Trump đã làm trong 4 năm dưới cái thời của Tổng thống Trump. Tổng thống Trump đã làm cho đất nước Mỹ ok, thế giới hòa bình, kinh tế phát triển, mọi người có công ăn việc làm, hàng loạt các công ty hãng xưởng nó trở lại đất nước Mỹ. Đó, thấy chưa? Đó là những gì mà ứng cử viên đảng Cộng hòa đang nói, đó là Tony Lane nói trước ông này luôn đó. Ông đang nói y hệt như Tony Lane nói. Cả cái thế giới này hòa bình, thấy chưa? Kinh tế phát triển, đất nước Mỹ giàu có, hung mạnh. Quá hay, quá hay. Bấm một cái like quý vị ơi, quá hay quý vị ơi.
Brings back common sense to this country.
Governor, do you want to respond to that? What has Kamala Harris done for the middle class?
Yeah, well, Kamala Harris's day one was Donald Trump's failure on COVID that led to the collapse of our economy. We were already before COVID in a manufacturing recession.
Rồi, ông này bắt đầu đem tổng thống Trump ra đổ thừa tiếp. Đổ thừa tiếp.
Whether it's the Infrastructure Act or other things we moved. Now, you made a question about experts said this. I've made a note of this. Economists can't be trusted. Science can't be trusted. National security folks can't be trusted. Look, if you're going to be president, you don't have all the answers. Donald Trump believes he does. My pro tip of the day is this. If you need heart surgery, listen to the people at the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota, not Donald Trump. And the same thing goes with this. And I ask you out there, teachers, nurses, truck drivers, whatever, how is it fair that you're paying your taxes every year and Donald Trump hasn't paid any federal tax in the last 15 years? The last year as president. That's what's wrong with the system. There's a way around it, and he's bragged about that. We're just asking for fairness in it, and that's all you want.
You have a minute.
Governor, you say trust the experts. But those same experts for 40 years said that if we shipped our manufacturing base off to China, we'd get cheaper goods. They lied about that. They said if we shipped our industrial base off to other countries, to Mexico and elsewhere, it would make the middle class stronger. They were wrong about that. They were wrong about the idea that if we made America less self-reliant, less productive in our own nation, it would somehow make us better off, and they were wrong about it. And for the first time in a generation, Donald Trump had the wisdom and the courage to say to that bipartisan consensus, we're not doing it anymore. We're bringing American manufacturing back. We're unleashing American energy. We're going to make more of our own stuff. And this isn't just an economic issue. I've got 3 beautiful little kids at home, 7, 4, and 2.
Ứng cử viên đảng Cộng hòa nói là nếu mà tổng thống Trump làm tổng thống thì chúng ta sẽ không lệ thuộc vào Trung Cộng. Những cái hàng hóa sẽ được sản xuất ở Mỹ. Nhiều công ty hãng xưởng sẽ trở lại đất nước Mỹ. Người dân Mỹ sẽ có công ăn việc làm, nền kinh tế Mỹ sẽ phát triển. Đó, quý vị nghe kỹ nhé. Còn mà đảng Dân Chủ thì nó lệ thuộc là nhập hàng hóa từ Trung Cộng, từ những cái nước Tào Lao, Mỹ Lao. Okay?
Look, I'm a union guy on this. I'm not a guy who wanted to ship things overseas, but I understand that, look, we produce soybeans and corn. We need to have fair trading partners. That's something that we believe in. I think the thing that most concerns me on this is Donald Trump was the guy who created the largest trade deficit in American history with China. So the rhetoric is good. Much of what the senator said right there, I'm in agreement with him on this. I watched it happen too. I watched it to my communities, and we talked about that. But we had people undercutting the right to collectively bargain. We had right to work states made it more difficult. We had companies that were willing to ship it over, and we saw people profit. Folks that are venture capital in some cases, putting money into companies that were overseas. We're in agreement that we bring those home. The issue is Donald Trump is talking about it. Kamala Harris has a record 250,000 more manufacturing jobs just in and out of the IRA.
May I respond to that?
Yes.
So I appreciate that. So if you notice, what Governor Walz just did is he said, first of all, Donald Trump has to listen to the experts. And then when he acknowledged that the experts screwed up, he said, well, Donald Trump didn't do nearly as good of a job as this that he did. So what Tim Walz is doing, and I honestly, Tim, I think you got a tough job here, because you've got to play whack-a-mole. You've got to pretend that Donald Trump didn't deliver rising take-home pay, which of course he did. You've got to pretend that Donald Trump didn't deliver lower inflation, which of course he did. And then you simultaneously got to defend Kamala Harris's atrocious economic record, which has made gas, groceries, and housing unaffordable for American citizens. I was raised by a woman who would sometimes go into medical debt so that she could put food on the table in our household. I know what it's like to not be able to afford the things that you need to afford. We can do so much better. To all of you watching, we can get back to an America that's affordable again. We just got to get back to common sense economic principles.
Hay quá.
Conversation on healthcare then.
Senator, Governor,
please.
Thank you, Margaret. We have a lot to get to ahead, gentlemen, on many topics, but right now I want to talk about personal qualifications. The vice president is often the last voice the president hears before making consequential decisions. We want to ask you about your leadership qualities. Governor Walz, you said you were in Hong Kong during the deadly Tiananmen Square protests in the spring of 1989. But Minnesota Public Radio and other media outlets are reporting that you actually didn't travel to Asia until August of that year.
Nãy giờ đa số là ứng cử viên của đảng Dân Chủ đó quý vị, là tất cả các chủ đề đều đổ thừa cho Tổng thống Trump và bảo vệ, ra sức cố gắng bảo vệ và tung hô bà Harris. Mà trong khi đó thì bà Harris chẳng làm được cái tích sự gì trong 3 năm rưỡi vừa qua. Còn dưới thời Tổng thống Trump 4 năm đó thì quý vị biết là Tổng thống Trump đã làm cái gì cho người dân Mỹ và đất nước Mỹ, đúng không? Ông này là nãy giờ là ông là cứ đem Tổng thống Trump ra đổ thừa và tung hô bà Harris và kêu gọi bỏ phiếu cho bà Harris để bà Harris sẽ làm này làm nọ làm kia, chứ thật sự bà chẳng biết làm gì đâu quý vị nhé.
Look, I will be the first to tell you, I have poured my heart into my community. I've tried to do the best I can, but I've not been perfect. And I'm a knucklehead.
Dạ đúng rồi, anh chưa bắt giới ơi, nãy giờ ông này ổng đổ thừa không à anh? 4 cái chủ đề mà người ta hỏi ổng á, rồi ổng trả lời dòng do tam quốc, ầu ơ với dầu, rồi ổng cứ đem Tổng thống Trump ra ổng đổ thừa thôi. Và ổng tung hô cái bà kia. Và thật sự thì người dân Mỹ, hàng trăm triệu người dân Mỹ biết bà kia chẳng làm cái tích sự gì trong 3 năm rưỡi vừa qua.
To make sure that I'm there for the people, to make sure that I get this right. I will say more than anything. Many times I will talk a lot. I will get caught up in the rhetoric. But being there, the impact it made, the difference it made in my life, I learned a lot about China. I hear the critiques of this. I would make the case that Donald Trump should have come on one of those trips with us. I guarantee you he wouldn't be praising Xi Jinping about COVID. And I guarantee you he wouldn't start a trade war that he ends up losing. So this is about trying to understand the world. It's about trying to do the best you can for your community. And then it's putting yourself out there and letting your folks understand what it is. My commitment, whether it be through teaching, which I was good at, or whether it was being a good soldier, or was being a good member of Congress, those are the things that I think are the values that people care about.
Governor, just to follow up on that, the question was, can you explain the discrepancy?
All I said on this is I got there that summer and misspoke on this. So I will just, that's what I've said. So I was in Hong Kong and China during the democracy protest.
Người ta đang hỏi ổng là tại sao mà đi qua Trung Cộng đó quý vị. Ông này ổng trả lời dòng do tam quốc, ổng đổ thừa Tổng thống Trump rồi ổng chẳng trả lời vô cái câu hỏi gì cả.
In 2016, you called your running mate Donald Trump unfit for the nation's highest office, and you said he could be America's Hitler. I know you've been asked many times, and you've said you regret those comments and explained you then voted for Donald Trump in 2020. But the Washington Post reported new messages last week in which you also disparaged Trump's economic record while he was president, writing to someone in 2020, quote, Trump thoroughly failed to deliver his economic populism. You're now his running mate, and you've shifted many of your policy stances to align with his. If you become vice president, why should Americans trust that you will give Donald Trump the advice he needs to hear and not just the advice he wants to hear? You have 2 minutes.
Well, first of all, Margaret, because I've always been open. And sometimes, of course, I disagree with the president, but I've also been extremely open about the fact that I was wrong about Donald Trump. I was wrong, first of all, because I believed some of the media stories that turned out to be dishonest fabrications of his record. But most importantly, Donald Trump delivered for the American people. Rising wages, rising take-home pay, an economy that worked for normal Americans, a secure southern border, a lot of things, frankly, that I didn't think he'd be able to deliver on. And yeah, when you screw up, when you misspeak, when you get something wrong and you change your mind, you ought to be honest with the American people about it. It's one of the reasons, Margaret, why I've done so many interviews is because I think it's important to actually explain to the American people where I come down on the issues and what changed. Now, you pointed out the messages from 2020. Margaret, I've been extremely consistent that I think there were a lot of things that we could have done better in the Trump administration in the first round if Congress was doing its job. I strongly believe, and I've been a United States Senator, that Congress is not just a high-class debating society. It's not just a forum for senators and congressmen to whine about problems. It's a forum to govern. So there were a lot of things on the border, on tariffs, for example, where I think that we could have done so much more if the Republican Congress and the Democrats in Congress had been a little bit better about how they govern the country. They were so obsessed with impeaching Donald Trump, they couldn't actually govern. I want to talk about this tariff issue in particular, Margaret, because Tim just accused this of being a national sales tax. Look, the one thing, and you're probably surprised to hear me praising Joe Biden, but the one thing that Joe Biden did is he continued some of the Trump tariffs that protected American manufacturing jobs. And it's the one issue, the most pro-worker part of the Biden administration, it's the one issue where Kamala Harris has run away from Joe Biden's record. Think about this. If you're trying to employ slave laborers in China at $3 a day, you're going to do that and undercut the wages of American workers unless our country stands up for itself and says, you're not accessing our markets unless you're paying middle-class Americans a fair wage.
Senator, your time is up. Nora?
Thank you. Now the issue of reproductive rights. Governor Walz, after Roe versus Wade was overturned, you signed a bill into law that made Minnesota one of the least restrictive states in the nation when it comes to abortion. Former President Trump said in the last debate that you believe abortion, quote, in the 9th month is absolutely fine.
Bây giờ nói tới cái chủ đề phá thai nè quý vị.
I'll give you 2 minutes.
That's not what the bill says, but look, this issue is what's on everyone's mind. Donald Trump put this all into motion. He brags about how great it was that he put the judges in and overturned Roe versus Wade, 52 years of personal autonomy. And then he tells us, oh, we send it to the states. It's a beautiful thing. Amanda Zaworski would disagree with you on it's a beautiful thing. A young bride in Texas waiting for their child at 18 weeks. She has a complication, a tear in the membrane. She needs to go in. The medical care at that point needs to be decided by the doctor. And that would have been an abortion. But in Texas, that would have put them in legal jeopardy. She went home, got sepsis, nearly dies, and now she may have difficulty having children. Or in Kentucky, Hadley Duvall, a 12-year-old child raped and impregnated by her stepfather. Those are horrific. Now, when God asked about that, Senator Vance said 2 wrongs don't make a right. There is no right in this. So in Minnesota, what we did was restore Roe versus Wade. We made sure that we put women in charge of their health care. But look, this is not what, if you don't know Amanda or a Hadley, you soon will. Their Project 2025 is going to have a registry of pregnancies. It's going to make it more difficult, if not impossible, to get contraception and limit access, if not eliminate access to infertility treatments. For so many of you out there listening,
rồi quý vị ơi, bây giờ Tony Lê phải đi ngủ rồi, mai sáng Tony Lê sẽ nói tiếp cái chủ đề hai ông này tranh luận nha quý vị nha. Quý vị nhớ bấm like và chia sẻ nha. Chúc quý vị ở Mỹ ngủ ngon nha. Chúc quý vị bà con ở vòng quanh thế giới một ngày vui vẻ nha. Have a good night. Thank you.